The air in the private rooftop lounge was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and the quiet hum of power. Park Jae-Hyun sat at the head of a long mahogany table, his face as still as a statue. Across from him, 3 men in gray suits pushed a contract forward. This was the culmination of months of work, a $1 million deal that would give Jae-Hyun total control over the city's northern shipping docks. His lieutenants stood behind him like shadows, their eyes sharp and watchful. To the rest of the world, he was the dragon, a man who never blinked and never lost. Just as Jae-Hyun reached for his silver pen to sign the paper, his phone vibrated on the table. He usually ignored personal calls during business, but this phone was special. It was the one encrypted for his most private work. He glanced at the screen, expecting a report from one of his captains. Instead, his heart skipped a beat. The message was in Korean. It was a language he had pushed to the back of his mind, a language that felt like soft memories and old pain. The text read, Yamagie Matgo Isioyo. Dawajusio. Mama is being beaten. Please help. Jae-Hyun froze. The gold tip of his pen hovered just inches above the signature line. In the reflection of the glass table, he saw his own eyes. For a split second, he wasn't a powerful mafia boss in a $5,000 suit. He was a small boy in a rainy alley in Seoul, watching his mother fall while he was too small to do anything but cry. Boss, his second-in-command, Min-ho, whispered. Is there a problem with the numbers? The men across the table looked at each other, confused. They had spent hours negotiating, and now the dragon was staring at a phone screen as if he had seen a ghost. Jae-Hyun's jaw tightened. He didn't know who this girl was or how she had gotten his number. It was likely a mistake, a wrong number sent by a terrified child who was reaching out into the dark. But in that moment, the logic of business didn't matter. The millions of dollars on the table looked like nothing more than scrap paper. Without a word, Jae-Hyun stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, making everyone in the room jump. He tucked the phone into his pocket and grabbed his black coat from the back of the chair. We are not finished here, Mr. Park, the lead businessman said, his voice shaking. If you walk out now, the deal is off. We go to your rivals. Jae-Hyun didn't even look at him. He adjusted his cufflinks with cold precision. Then go to them, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I have a more important appointment. His lieutenants were stunned. They had seen him stay calm during shootouts and police raids, but they had never seen him walk away from money. Min-ho stepped forward, trying to block his path. Boss, you can't be serious. Everything we've worked for is on this table. Where are you going? Jae-Hyun looked Min-ho in the eye. It was the look of a predator who had found a new target. A promise was made a long time ago, Min-ho. Tonight, I'm finally going to keep it. He walked out of the room, his long coat flowing behind him like wings. He didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his mind racing faster than his feet. As he reached the garage and climbed into his sleek black sedan, another message appeared on his dashboard screen. I'm hiding. He says he'll kill her. Please hurry. Jae-Hyun gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He slammed the car into gear, the tires screaming against the concrete as he roared out into the night. The dragon was no longer sleeping. He was awake, and he was hunting. The black sedan roared onto the main road, its engine sounding like a hungry beast in the quiet night. Jae-Hyun pushed his foot down on the gas pedal, watching the needle on the dashboard climb higher and higher. Outside the window, the city was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked glass. Blue, red, and yellow signs flashed by like colorful bullets, but Jae-Hyun didn't see the beauty of the city. He only saw the time ticking away on his glowing clock. Inside the car, the air felt tight. Jae-Hyun's heart hammered against his ribs, a feeling he hadn't felt in a very long time. For years, he had taught himself to be like ice. He was the boss, the man who stayed calm while everyone else panicked. He was the man who cared about profit margins and territory, not people. But now, his hands were sweating on the leather steering wheel. A voice in the back of his mind started to whisper, trying to make him stop. It was the cold, calculating part of him that had built his empire. Turn around, the voice said. You are throwing away millions for a stranger. You are a mafia boss, not a hero. If your enemies see you acting like this, they will think you are weak. He looked at the empty passenger seat and imagined his lieutenants' faces. They would be confused and angry. In his world, showing feelings was a dangerous mistake that could get a person killed. But then, his phone buzzed again in the cup holder. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car, showing the name he had saved only minutes ago, Jia. The little girl's words from the earlier text flashed in his mind. She wasn't just a random person. She was a child who spoke his first language, the language of his mother and his home. Every time he thought about turning the car around, he remembered the ghost of Seoul, the memory of his mother falling while he stood there, helpless and small. He had spent 25 years becoming powerful so that he would never feel that way again. He had built walls around his heart so thick that nothing could get in. He told himself he didn't care about anyone. But as he swerved around a slow-moving truck, he realized the truth. All that power was useless if he couldn't save one little girl who was asking for help. If he turned back now to remain the boss, he would be a coward, just like the people he hated. The adrenaline surged through his veins, making his vision sharp. He stopped fighting the urge to be the dragon and started being the man who made a promise long ago. The city streets became a racetrack. He zipped through red lights and turned corners so fast the tires screamed. He didn't care about the police or his rivals anymore. The GPS voice spoke calmly, telling him he was only 4 minutes away. 4 minutes could be a lifetime for someone in trouble. Jae-Hyun gripped the wheel even tighter, his jaw set in a hard line. He was done being just a businessman who moved money around. Tonight, he was a force of nature. The neon lights of the city reflected in his dark eyes, no longer looking like bullets, but like a path leading him to the one thing he needed more than power, a chance to be good. The rain hitting the windshield of the sedan began to sound like a different storm from long ago. As Jae-Hyun drove, the bright lights of the city faded away, replaced by the dark, narrow alleys of Seoul 25 years in the past. In his mind, he was no longer a man in a black suit. He was a 10-year-old boy named Jae-Hyun, wearing a thin jacket and shoes that were 2 sizes too small. He remembered the smell of the damp concrete and the sound of his mother's tired footsteps as they walked home from her double shift at the market. They didn't have much, but his mother always made him feel like they were the luckiest people in the world. She would share her small bowl of rice with him and tell him stories about his future, promising him that one day he would be a great man who helped others. But that night, the story stopped. They had turned a corner into their alley when 3 men stepped out from the shadows. They were debt collectors, men with cold eyes and heavy hands. They didn't care that his mother had worked 18 hours straight. They didn't care that a young boy was watching. They only cared about the money she didn't have. Jae-Hyun remembered jumping in front of his mother, his small arms spread wide to protect her. He had yelled at the men to leave her alone, but they had only laughed. One of them pushed him aside so hard that he hit the brick wall, the breath leaving his lungs in a painful gasp. From the ground, he watched as they grabbed his mother. He tried to get up, but his legs felt like jelly. He was too small. He was too weak. The most painful part of the memory wasn't the sound of the men's voices or the rain. It was the look in his mother's eyes as she looked at him one last time. She wasn't angry. She was scared for him. She spent her final moments trying to tell him to run, even as she fell to the ground. Jae-Hyun had stayed there, frozen in the mud, crying out for help that never came. The police didn't arrive in time, and the neighbors stayed behind their locked doors. In that dark alley, the boy he used to be died. As he sat by his mother's side under the flickering street lamp, he made a silent vow. He realized that being good didn't keep you safe. Kindness didn't stop a fist or a blade. Only power could do that. Only being the strongest person in the room could ensure that you never had to beg for mercy again. He had spent every day since that night building his empire. He had climbed the ladder of the underworld, becoming the dragon so that no one could ever push him against a wall again. He had surrounded himself with money, weapons, and men who feared him, thinking that this was the only way to honor his mother's memory. He thought that by becoming a monster, he was finally safe. But as the GPS beeped, bringing him back to the present, Jae-Hyun realized he had been wrong. He had gained all the power in the world, but he had used it to hide, not to help. The little girl's text message was a mirror, showing him that there were still people like his mother trapped in dark rooms, waiting for a hero who never showed up. The ghost of Seoul wasn't just a memory of pain. It was a reminder of a debt he hadn't paid. He had failed one mother 25 years ago. He would not fail another one tonight. The grip he had on the steering wheel tightened as the house came into view. The boy from the alley was gone, but the man who emerged from the car carried a lifetime of justice in his heart. The car was only a few blocks away, but for Jae-Hyun, Every second felt like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. His phone sat in the center console, its screen glowing like a small fire in the dark. Suddenly, it buzzed again. The message was short, but it made his blood run cold. "I hear footsteps," Jae had written. "He is calling my name. He sounds very angry." Jae-Hyun stared at the road, his eyes sharp and focused. He could almost picture the scene in his head. He imagined a small girl huddled in a dark corner, holding her breath while a monster walked through the house. He thought about Marcus Reed, the man who was supposed to be a protector but was instead a hunter. Jae-Hyun typed back with one hand while he steered with the other. "Stay very still, Jae," he wrote. "Don't make a sound. I am almost there." A few seconds later, another message popped up. The footsteps stopped outside the door. "I can see his shoes through the crack. He is breathing loud." Jae-Hyun felt a surge of protective anger that he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a business rival or a street thug. This was a child who was terrified in her own home. He pushed the car even harder, the engine screaming as he flew past darkened houses. He wanted to tell her to run, but he knew that was dangerous. If she moved, Marcus would hear her. If she cried out, it would be over. "He is talking to himself," the next text said. "He says he knows I'm in here. He says I shouldn't have tried to help Mama. I'm so scared. Matt." Jae-Hyun flinched at the name. She was calling him Matt because that was the name he had given her to keep things simple. But it felt like a reminder of the person he used to be before the world made him hard. He wasn't just a boss right now. He was her only hope. He realized that Jae was watching her world fall apart, just like he had watched his own world crumble in that rainy alley in Seoul. "Jae, listen to me," he typed, his fingers moving quickly. "I want you to close your eyes and think of a happy place. Think of your mama's smile. I am turning onto your street right now. I won't let him touch you." The phone went silent for a moment. The silence was the most terrifying part of all. Jae-Hyun turned the corner and saw a small house with a broken porch light. It looked lonely and sad under the pouring rain. Just as he pulled the car to the curb, the final message appeared on his screen. "The door handle is turning. Help me." Jae-Hyun didn't wait to turn off the engine. He didn't check his suit or adjust his tie. He threw the car door open and stepped out into the storm. The dragon was gone, and in his place was a man who had a promise to keep. The footsteps Jae heard weren't the only ones in the house anymore. Now there was someone else coming, and he wasn't hiding. Jae-Hyun did not run toward the house. He walked with a slow, heavy rhythm that made the very ground feel small. The rain soaked through his expensive suit, but he didn't feel the cold. Inside the small house, a loud crash echoed, the sound of wood breaking. Marcus Reed had finally forced his way into the room where Jae was hiding. "Found you." A man's voice roared from inside, followed by a child's sharp scream. Jae-Hyun reached the front door, which was already hanging off its hinges. He stepped over a broken picture frame and entered the hallway. The air smelled like old beer and fear. He could hear Marcus in the back bedroom, his voice thick with a cruel kind of joy as he grabbed the girl. Jae-Hyun moved toward the noise, his face as calm as the surface of a frozen lake. In the bedroom, Marcus Reed was a towering figure of anger. He had his hand wrapped around Jae's small arm, pulling her out from under a bed. The girl was shaking, her pink nightdress dusty and stained with tears. Marcus was so busy yelling that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him. He didn't notice the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Suddenly, Jae-Hyun stood in the doorway. He didn't shout. He didn't pull out a weapon. He simply stood there, his dark eyes fixed on Marcus with a look that could stop a heart. The silence he brought into the room was heavier than any scream. It was a silence that felt like the moment before a mountain falls. Marcus finally turned around, his face turning from red to a sickly white. He saw a man who looked like he belonged in a skyscraper, not this broken home. He saw the way Jae-Hyun's jaw was set, and the way his hands were steady at his sides. Marcus let go of Jiao's arm, his own hand starting to tremble. Who are you?" Marcus stammered, trying to sound brave, but his voice cracked. Jae-Hyun didn't answer him. He looked past the man and saw Jia. She was staring at him with wide, hopeful eyes, recognizing the man who had promised to help her. Jae-Hyun felt the dragon inside him pull back, replaced by a quiet, deadly focus. He took one step into the room, and the floorboards didn't even creak under his weight. "I am the man who told her everything would be okay," Jae-Hyun said, his voice low and perfectly smooth. "And I never break a promise." Marcus Reed realized in that second that he wasn't looking at a neighbor or a policeman. He was looking at something much more dangerous. He was looking at his own ending. The silence in the room grew even louder, pressing against Marcus's chest until he could barely breathe. The dragon had arrived, and the hunt was over. Jae-Hyun moved across the room with a grace that belonged to a predator, while Marcus Reed stood frozen against the wall. Jae-Hyun reached down and gently helped Jia to her feet. He didn't say a word, but the way he stepped between the girl and Marcus told her she was safe. He then turned his attention to Yoon-hee, who was slumped on the floor near the bed. The dragon knelt beside the unconscious woman, his expensive black suit pressing into the dusty carpet. To anyone else, Jae-Hyun looked like a cold businessman, but his hands were surprisingly gentle as he checked Yoon-hee's pulse. He saw the bruises blooming on her face and the blood matted in her hair. His jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping in his cheek, but he kept his emotions locked away. He adjusted his jacket, the weight of the fine fabric a reminder of the power he carried, a power he was now using to shield a broken family. Even as he looked at Yoon-hee, his eyes never truly left Marcus. It was a terrifying skill he had learned in the underworld, the ability to care for the weak while never losing sight of the threat. Every time Marcus shifted his feet or tried to wipe the sweat from his forehead, Jae-Hyun's eyes would flick toward him like a blade. Marcus felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy, pinned down by the sheer force of Jae-Hyun's presence. "Stay with your mother." "Jia," Jae-Hyun said quietly, his voice like velvet over gravel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief, handing it to the girl. "Press this against the cut on her forehead. Do not be afraid. I am right here." Jia took the cloth with trembling hands, her eyes moving from the scary man against the wall to the calm man in the suit. She saw that Jae-Hyun was like a wall of iron standing between her and the nightmare. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was a guardian who had stepped out of the shadows to answer her cry. Jae-Hyun stood back up, smoothing out the wrinkles in his trousers. He looked perfectly composed, as if he were back in his rooftop lounge, but the air around him hummed with a dangerous energy. He hadn't even raised his hand to Marcus yet, but the psychological pressure was already crushing the man. Jae-Hyun had seen many monsters in his life, but he had a special hatred for those who hurt people who couldn't fight back. The room was silent except for the sound of the rain hitting the window and the ragged breathing of Marcus Reed. Jae-Hyun took a single step toward Marcus, his shadow stretching long across the floor. He didn't need a weapon to be the most dangerous thing in the house. He was the dragon, and he was just getting started. Jae-Hyun reached out and grabbed Marcus by the collar of his shirt. The movement was so fast and strong that Marcus didn't even have time to blink. With one hand, Jae-Hyun hauled the man out of the bedroom and down the narrow hallway. He moved with a cold, steady anger that made Marcus look like a rag doll. When they reached the kitchen, Jae-Hyun shoved him against the old wooden table. Marcus hit the edge with a groan and slumped into a chair, his eyes darting around the room for a way to escape. The kitchen was dim, lit only by a single yellow bulb that flickered over their heads. Jae-Hyun stood over him, his shadow covering Marcus like a dark blanket. He didn't start hitting him. Instead, he leaned in close, his face just inches away from Marcus's. The silence in the kitchen was scarier than any shouting could ever be. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. "Look at your hands," Jae-Hyun said, his voice a low, terrifying whisper. Marcus looked down at his shaking fingers, which were stained with Yoon-hee's blood. "You used those hands to hurt a woman who loved you. You used them to make a little girl scream. You think you are a big man, don't you?" Marcus tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It was an accident," he finally managed to wheeze. "She wouldn't listen. I didn't mean to go that far." Jae-Hyun's eyes turned into cold stones. "There are no accidents here. Only choices. And tonight, you chose to become a monster." Jae-Hyun pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. He placed it on the table between them. "Do you know who I am, Marcus?" Marcus stared at the phone. He didn't know the name, but he recognized the symbol on the screen, the mark of the dragon. His face went from pale to completely white. Everyone in the city knew that symbol. It meant power, it meant money, and it meant that if you were on the wrong side of it, you simply stopped existing. "I have already sent your face to every man who works for me," Jae-Hyun said calmly. "By tomorrow morning, your bank accounts will be empty. Your phone will be disconnected. The apartment you live in will no longer be yours. Every person you know will forget your name because talking to you will be a death sentence." Marcus began to sob, the sound of his crying echoing off the kitchen tiles. "Please, I'll leave. I'll go away. Just don't kill me." Jae-Hyun leaned back, his expression showing no mercy. "Killing you is too easy. I want you to feel the same fear that Jia felt tonight. I want you to walk out that door and realize you have nothing. No home, no friends, and no place to hide. If I see your face in this city after sunrise, the dragon will not be this patient." He stood up straight and adjusted his cuffs. The kitchen confessional was over. He had dismantled Marcus's entire life in less than 5 minutes using nothing but his voice and his reputation. Jae-Hyun pointed toward the back door. Marcus didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet, tripped over a chair, and ran out into the pouring rain without looking back. Jae-Hyun stood alone in the quiet kitchen for a moment, listening to the rain. He had erased a monster, but the work wasn't done. He turned back toward the hallway, his heart softening just a little as he thought of the girl waiting in the other room. He had used his darkness to create a path for her light. And for the first time in 25 years, the dragon felt like he was finally doing something right. The kitchen door stayed open for a moment, letting in the cool, wet air of the night before Jae-Hyun closed it with a soft click. The loud, scary noise of Marcus Reed running away was gone, replaced by the quiet pitter-patter of rain on the roof. Jae-Hyun stood still, taking a deep breath to calm the fire that had been burning in his chest. He straightened his silk tie and wiped a stray drop of rain from his forehead, trying to put his mask of stone back on before returning to the bedroom. When he entered the room, he saw Jia sitting on the edge of the bed. She was still holding the white handkerchief against her mother's forehead, her small hands steady despite everything she had been through. Yoon-hee was starting to move, her eyes fluttering open as she let out a weak groan. Jae-Hyun knelt down beside them, but this time he didn't look like a predator. He looked like a man who was tired of carrying the weight of the world. "Is he gone?" Jia whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "He is gone, Jia," Jae-Hyun answered. "He will never come back to this house. You have my word." Jia looked at him, really looked at him, for a long time. She saw the expensive suit and the hard lines of his face, but she also saw the sadness hidden in his dark eyes. Suddenly, she reached out and tucked her small hand into his large, calloused palm. It was the same way his sister or his mother might have held his hand a lifetime ago. "Gamawoyo, ajuossi," she said softly, the sound of the Korean words for thank you. Uncle hit Jae-Hyun harder than any physical blow ever could. It was the language of his heart, a language he had tried to forget, so he wouldn't have to feel the pain of his past. Hearing it from this brave little girl broke through the last of his icy walls. For 25 years, he had been the dragon, a man made of shadow and iron. But in this quiet moment, the iron finally melted. A single tear escaped from the corner of his eye, rolling down his cheek. He didn't try to hide it or wipe it away. He sat there on the floor of the messy bedroom, the powerful Mafia boss crying silently with a child he barely knew. He wasn't crying because he was sad. He was crying because for the first time since that rainy night in Seoul, he felt like he was a good person. He had finally used his power to save a life instead of taking one. "Uljimasio," Jia whispered, telling him not to cry as she reached up with her free hand to pat his shoulder. Jae-Hyun let out a shaky breath and managed a small, real smile, the first one he had felt in decades. He squeezed her hand gently, letting her know he was okay. He realized then that Jia had saved him just as much as he had saved her. She had given him back his soul. He looked at Yoon-hee, who was now looking at him with confused but grateful eyes, and he knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to just walk away and let them struggle. He was going to make sure they never felt afraid or hungry ever again. "I'm going to take care of everything," he promised them, speaking in Korean now, his voice thick with emotion. "You are part of my family now, and the dragon always protects his own." Jae-Hyun stood up slowly, his knees popping after sitting on the floor for so long. He looked down at his ruined suit, and then back at the mother and daughter who were still huddled together on the bed. He knew that even though the monster was gone, this house was still filled with bad memories. It was a place of shadows and pain, and he wasn't going to let them stay here for another night. He stepped out into the hallway and pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number that usually meant trouble for someone. Minho answered on the first ring, his voice sounding tired and worried. "Boss, where are you? The men from the shipping deal are furious. They are saying you insulted them by walking out." "Let them be angry," Jae-Hyun said, his voice returning to its calm, cold strength. I have a different kind of job for the crew tonight. I need the cleanup team at an address I'm sending you right now. But listen carefully, Min-ho. This is not a hit. This is a rescue. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Min-ho and the others were used to moving money or hiding bodies, not helping people. Jae-Hyun didn't care if they were confused. He gave his orders with the same authority he used to run his criminal empire. He told Min-ho to bring 2 black SUVs, a female doctor he could trust, and the keys to a private apartment he owned on the quiet side of the city, a place with large windows, thick walls, and 24-hour security. I want this house emptied of their personal things by morning, Jae-Hyun continued. Find them the best clothes, fill the fridge with the best food, and put a permanent security detail on the front door. If a single person who doesn't belong there even breathes in their direction, I want to know about it. When the headlights of the SUVs finally swept across the bedroom walls, Jia flinched, but Jae-Hyun put a steady hand on her shoulder. He watched as his men entered the house. They were large, tough-looking men in dark coats, the kind of men who usually made people run away in fear. But tonight, under Jae-Hyun's watchful eye, they were different. They moved quietly and respectfully. One of them carried Yoonhee's bags, while another helped the doctor carry her medical kit into the room. Jae-Hyun watched his business associates act like movers and guardians. It was a strange sight, but it made him feel a sense of pride he hadn't expected. He was showing his men that power wasn't just about taking things away from people. It was about having the strength to give them a new start. He stood by the door as the doctor finished checking Yoonhee, ensuring she was stable enough to be moved to the new apartment. As the team began to load the cars, Min-ho walked up to Jae-Hyun and handed him a set of keys. The apartment is ready, boss. It's the one overlooking the park. It's the safest place we own. Jae-Hyun took the keys and nodded. He looked at Jia, who was now dressed in a warm coat one of the men had brought. She looked small but much less afraid than she had an hour ago. He realized that by ordering this relocation, he was finally cleaning up the messes of his own life, too. He was using the cleanup crew to wash away the dirt of the past and build a fortress around the only thing that mattered. The dragon had spoken, and for once, his fire was being used to keep a family warm instead of burning everything down. 6 months had passed since the night the rain tried to wash away the shadows of a broken home. The seasons had changed, and the biting cold of winter had given way to the soft, green leaves of spring. Park Jae-Hyun sat in the back of his black sedan, the engine idling quietly. The windows were tinted dark, making him invisible to the world outside, but he could see everything perfectly. He was parked across the street from a bright, modern school building where children were running and laughing in the morning sun. He watched as a familiar blue car pulled up to the curb. Yoonhee stepped out first. She looked healthy and strong, her face free of the bruises and the fear that had once clouded her beauty. She walked around to the other side and opened the door for Jia. The little girl jumped out, wearing a yellow backpack and a big smile. She looked like any other happy second grader. A far cry from the terrified child in the pink nightdress who had sent a text message to a stranger. Jae-Hyun leaned back against the leather seat, a quiet sense of peace filling his chest. He was still the dragon. He still ran his business. And he still sat at the head of long mahogany tables, making deals that shaped the city. His world was still dangerous and gray, but it was no longer empty. Every Sunday, he put aside his dark business to visit the apartment overlooking the park. He would bring Korean snacks and books, and for a few hours, he wasn't a boss. He was just Uncle Matt, the man who helped Jia with her math homework and shared tea with Yoonhee. He had kept every part of his promise. Marcus Reed was gone, a ghost who would never dare to show his face in this city again. The Kim family was safe, protected by an invisible wall of men who answered only to Jae-Hyun. But more importantly, Jae-Hyun had saved himself. He had finally honored the memory of his mother and his sister by ensuring that another little girl's story had a happy ending. As the school bell rang, Jia turned around and waved toward the street. She couldn't see him through the dark glass, but she knew he was there. She always knew. Jae-Hyun raised a hand in return, a small, hidden gesture of love. He watched her run toward the school doors, her yellow backpack bouncing with every step. Ready to go. Boss, Min-ho asked from the driver's seat. The meeting at the docks starts in 20 minutes. Jae-Hyun took one last look at the school before nodding. Let's go, he said, his voice firm and steady. The sedan pulled away from the curb and merged into the city traffic. Jae-Hyun was returning to his empire, to the world of shadows and power. He was still a mafia boss, a man whose name made others tremble. But as he looked at the city lights reflecting off the hood of his car, he knew he was finally a man of his word. The dragon had found his heart, and he would never let it turn to stone again.